Okay, well, welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brooke Olson and Eric Sjoberg for a while here. We're going to do a series on manipulation, and we're going to talk about the different forms of manipulation and how to manage them. But right now, we're just going to start out with a general conversation about manipulation in general and talk about how we fall into and get sucked in. Eric, what are your thoughts on some of this?
Well, I think manipulation is a sign of something. Like if I'm doing that, or if the person I'm in relationship with is doing that, it's a sign that something is awry, and or that there's a lack of awareness that relationship can happen in any other way. Maybe that's all we know in relationship is manipulation. So family of origin, dysfunction, rectangle I've talked about in other episodes with you, and the notion that rectangle family systems is really built on scarcity and duality and urgency and lack of attachment and lack of safety. And so we do rectangle dysfunctional behaviors as a way to try and get our needs met in a system where there isn't enough to go around, and there isn't safety, there isn't just general acceptance of who each other is, who I am. And that leads to strategies and patterns and imprints that are not fun, and that lead to high conflict and lead to uncomfortable connection that we may think is normal. We may think that discomfort is normal because that's all we have. And so it's really a trick to kind of come into consciousness about that in the first place. If we think it's normal, it's like, wait, I'm doing fine. What are you talking about? I'm not manipulating.
Yeah, well, I want to pull a little bit of that out because I think it's really important. The one piece that you said is when we're manipulating, we're trying to get a need met. We're trying to dictate an outcome that is of benefit to us on some level. And it is a survival strategy. And to your point, so much of this is unconscious. I think many of us are unconsciously manipulating our world on an ongoing basis in terms of how we do relationship. And to be able to come out of that unconsciousness and be in conversation with ourselves while we're in conversation with others around what we're actually trying to do in this moment is an important beginning point to explore.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to flush out the notion of being in survival here, because some of your audience, there is, that word is going to mean different to some than others, and survival meaning physical threat, physical danger, survival, and that's definitely included. If I don't do it right, or if I don't manipulate to get my needs in ways that I can stay under the radar of the other person, I could get hit or hurt or killed. And then there's also this other form of survival that typically coexists in those realms, and it is attachment survival. Like if we as humans don't get our needs for attunement and affection and appreciation, allowing attention, play, the facets of love, we won't do well. And there's evidence now that infants that don't get good attachment, some of them don't survive.
Mm-hmm. And certainly don't thrive.
And don't thrive. Failure to thrive, and SIDS sometimes may be attributed to that. And so, but more often, many people just didn't get parents that knew what love was in the attachment realm. And so we're really working in two overlapping arenas, one being actual violence and the other being attachment. and love, and
But
we're not getting it.
so feedback to me in case I'm just not seeing this the way that you are, but from a perceived standpoint, on some level, both of these are about survival. I mean, there's the violence piece and there's all that going on, but there's the sense of not being attached, the sense of not having the nourishment and the combined love of other is also a sense of not being able to function or survive in the world as well.
Right. And I think the attachment one is complicated, at least in my experience with it, of where there can be, as infant, in particular pre-verbal infants, where we don't have memory,
Mhm.
the evidence that's coming out of that world and attachment theory and pre and perinatal trauma and where there can be fear of death because you're left alone, or your parents are yelling at each other, or your needs are not attuned to, and where that's a survival level that we don't remember, and then we grow up older, and then our attachment needs aren't, we don't perceive them as actual survival, and where we perceive our attachment needs as more dependency or neediness or all of those things, and we separate them from survival terminology because they don't seem life or death. And it's like, wait, why am I so spun out here? I'm not going to die. It's not like I'm going to die if I don't get my, if you don't pay attention to me. But the wiring diagram is still plugging into that. And we have to remember that mammals and humans in particular, we have a gestation period that lasts 5 to 7 years after we're born. We don't really get fully cooked to where we can operate on our own until long after we're born. And so that attunement and affection and the different facets of love are really necessary to complete the formation of the psyche of the being through
Right.
long beyond what we normally think of.
Yeah, and our cognitive process really isn't fully cooked until we're in our mid late 20s.
Right.
So there
If
is this
ever.
long period of development, or it's longer for sure. But there's this other thing that I think, to just dial in a little bit of what you're talking about, is this manipulation, this unconscious manipulation that happens through that development of trying to get needs met, even from a pre-verbal stage. It's that place where the baby is in the crib and crying, and when mom comes in, just before mom comes in, the baby stops crying and the mom opens the doors and says, hi, I love you. And the baby gets this notion that in order to get their needs met, they have to be quiet. And that becomes a form of how they manipulate or try to work their world as adults, because there's this thing in the background is I can't speak my mind, and they move into some of the things that we're going to talk about.
Right. Yeah, and I think the other component of this is that we have our children learn the language that we speak to each other and to them. And for English speakers, they learn English, and Spanish, and whatever. But they also learn the language of getting needs met from us as parents. And if we're manipulative, if we're doing one of the things, like let's say just the triangle of, persecution, rescuing, and victim, like that Karpman drama triangle is one facet we will be looking at here, and where if that is the matrix, if that's the communication style of the parents, that's the language that we learn as babies and children and infants, and we unawares will be doing that form of manipulation that our parents or our family are doing.
Yeah.
As nonsensical as it might make, it's not like these behaviors really withstand the test of critical thinking and relational skills and psychotherapy or parts work or whatever it is that we're doing. Like when we look at those, there's like, oh, that doesn't work, but we don't know that when we're kids, so we're doing the best we can. And the ending up just like mom or dad is congratulations, I'm sorry material.
And some of this stuff, I think, we look at as an adaptation, right? A survival adaptation or whatever that may be. And in the moment as a child, it may seem to work. There may be some level of actually having that manipulation work to get a need met. So it's adaptive, right? Mm-hmm. But as we extend into our adulthood or our adolescence and then our adulthood, those same strategies relationally become very maladaptive. They may work within the system, but they don't work outside of the system.
Right. Yeah, we're in the rectangle conversation of the 4 rectangles. The rectangle family of origin, the one we're born into and we're trying to navigate and be in, let's say, whatever form of manipulation to navigate these 6 rats that are all stuck together and in dysfunction together. And then we leave home and we think we have escaped that, but we've now internalized that. That's the second rectangle. And then the third is the one we recreate with our partner. And the fourth is really the setting that this is in, the context, the culture that we're in. And, that's a trip. Like we're in the middle of kind of protests and race riots. And one of the common conversations I've been hearing on some of the podcasts and interviews is how normal it is for parents to teach their kids how to interact with cops. Be submissive, do it this way, like all of these kinds of conversations that are necessary for parents of color that are not so necessary for white folk.
Right. And there's a social manipulation within there, right? There's a survival manipulation that happens within that.
Right. And that's the kind of external rectangle, the fourth rectangle, and they're trying to manipulate the persecutor known as the police. Mm-hmm. And by teaching them how to be, the right kind of victim so that you don't get hurt or shot or hopefully arrested. And so, that's just endemic in the culture that we're in right now.
So just kind of circling back a little bit, we're talking about, what manipulation does and how it helps us navigate our families of origin and how it becomes maladaptive in our life as we go along. But, what do you feel like at the bottom of this conversation, because I want to kind of build this from the bottom up, is the driving piece, if you will, for us to engage in whatever form of overt or covert manipulation that we're doing?
What's the driving piece?
Right. What's the driving force?
Besides the survival that we opened with?
Right.
Well, I think it's survival and attachment. We want and need connection, and we want and need food, shelter, clothing. Mm-hmm. and we want and think we need, the latest and greatest thing that we want our parents to buy us or whatever. And, we as adults, we want our cake and eat it too.
Mhm.
We want all kinds of stuff, and we think we need things. And I think that's a piece of the puzzle, is the discernment between needs and wants,
Mhm.
and where we can have a tendency to conflate them and make demands to get our wants met,
Mhm.
and where we can also make demands to get our needs met that are really not our partner or the other person's responsibility.
So if I step down into that a little bit while you're talking, I'm just trying to bring this down into an organic component or a nervous system component. And the trigger to me as we're having this conversation, Eric, is this is brainstem, this is lower brain function kind of fear. I don't have what I need, and it triggers something in my system that's uncomfortable, and that's the initiating impulse, right?
I don't know if that's true all the time. I think sometimes that's true for sure, like the survival piece. But where we have a survival trauma experience from the past, or we have an attachment trauma experience from the past that's still here, that's still echoing or rippling, the notion that we're actually in harm's way as a cause to make us manipulate is a reach sometimes. Sometimes it's not a reach.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter, like whether it's a brainstem initiation or an emotional neglect initiation, or um, the ripples of either of those. It's an involuntary process initially for us to move into manipulative methods, and we have as a requirement to be able to navigate and stop manipulating the need to become aware of our manipulating. If we're not aware of it, if we're unconscious of our incompetence, which circles back into the stages of competence: unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. Those first two are a doozy. They're just, that's really the gist of what we're talking about. The first one being rat tangle, the second one being waking up in the rat tangle. And that's not fun. It's uncomfortable.
Well, I think about um, conversations with friends. I think about conversations with my partner, and um, some of this idea of waking up in the rat tangle, waking up to the manipulation that's going on. How sometimes there'll be this playfulness or this sense of playfulness or throwing something out that is meant to be playful and it's really not. It's a dagger. It's a shot, and we write it off as being playful. It's like, no, I'm just teasing or whatever. But
Yeah.
there's something that we're trying to have happen within that is eliciting a response of some sort. And
Right.
when we're manipulating, and I just had this notion, and it may be totally off, but I'm going to throw it out just because we're in conversation around it, is some form of trying to get submission to what our motives are, either overt or
Yeah.
covert.
Yeah. Or passive.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that's in my ballpark. It's, what you're describing there, I do sometimes. snarkiness, like where I can be in that kind of covert aggression of joking, but joking at um, the embers or the fire of someone's vulnerability,
Mhm.
and where that is designed to push people back, to give me space if there's some real or imagined boundary violation,
Mhm.
where there's some something going on that feels unsafe to me or unconscious to me, or whatever story I might have in the moment. I can do that. Sometimes I can do it strategically to discharge and lighten the energy, but I can also do it unconsciously and do it as a jab, as a parry and a jab,
Mhm.
and a play that I learned from my family,
Mhm.
a kind of play that is, you know, biting sarcasm.
Right. Right. And that's a manipulation. And
That's a
the
manipulation.
the manipulation that's in that is one of dominance, or trying to create dominance of some sort. And there can be a play that goes on in that, but there's usually something that's got an edge of discomfort to it, right? Both giving and receiving. There's an attack to it. So I just want to bring in that for a second, because this is the initial conversation that we're having. But these types of things, when we're writing them down and we're in conversation with other, and we're dealing with high conflict or conflict of any kind, um, this snarkiness or the sarcasm or this attacking language is that place that we are trying to back somebody down, um, create superiority, or, to your point, just create distance, back up.
Right, which is not in the realm of dominance per se, as much as you
Protection.
know as protection. And like, I'm backed up as far as I can go, or I'm willing to go just now. It's your turn to back up. Here's a little bit of invitation to do that, which can be, like I said, be effective, but it can also be very destructive and problematic and painful. And how that can land is tricky, because some people can manage that, and some people can manage it sometimes and not other times.
Mhm.
And where that's a thing, you and I play here sometimes, and
Right.
it's it's an adjustment that comes in, and it can be a jab dressed in drag as an adjustment or fun.
Hmm. As we have this conversation, and as I contemplate these particular things on an ongoing basis, like I know that you do as well, there is so much of our waking hours that we spend unconsciously, um, not aware of our effect on other people, not even hardly sometimes even aware of other people or what's around us. And in order to navigate that matrix of going from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence is
Conscious incompetence.
no to unconscious competence, which is ultimately
Oh,
where we want
the
to
flow
get.
state. Yeah.
The flow state
Mhm.
is not a direct line. It's something that we slip back and forth in, and to hit that flow state is not typically, for most of us, something that we spend a lot of time in.
Yeah, and I'm of a mind that striving for flow state, for unconscious competence is, you know, the best way to not get there.
It just happens. It's
It
not
just
something that we
happens.
strive
So
for. It just
that's a
occurs through.
byproduct of really being in conscious competence.
Right. It's a
And so
byproduct
to
of
be in the
navigating
chop
all of
would
them.
carry water of conscious competence and be like, be aware of where my incompetence is and to work diligently and in refining that as is appropriate to the moment.
Being mindfully present
Mm-hmm.
as much as we can to where we're screwing up.
Right. And this can take this conversation about manipulation into the other fractal, which is if who we are relating to is manipulating or in reaction to me, and I have a mind to be present and not react and not manipulate back,
Mm-hmm.
that is sustainable for a moment, for a minute, for 10 minutes, for, sometimes you can hit it and be able to navigate it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can do that fairly well with some people all the time. And other people, I have like the moment it starts, the timer goes off or timer starts. And if I don't like resolve that or escape it, my reaction will come back and then I will respond to the manipulation or the reaction with my reaction or my manipulation. And off to the rat tangle party we go.
And here I think, things that we go over and over and over again in our conversations that I go over and over again in our podcast is that elicits two things for me. One, it elicits that sense of I'm triggered, and tolerating the sensation of being triggered is certainly part of this navigation before I hit the next step, which is do I engage or do I disengage? And that goes into the disengage piece that we talked about. But the lack of tolerance for the sensation given whoever we're dealing with, because certainly there are people that you and I both know that we have zero tolerance for being in a relationship with. And when we get triggered, we have choice. The choice is to totally disengage and walk away, or to engage in trying to get something out of that engagement, which typically, I'm guessing just from the conversation that we're having, is some form of manipulating them into alignment with what I'm trying to say. The argument, trying to get inside their belief system and maneuvering them into my belief system.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some people do that. Some people try to do that and aren't good at it. Some people do that and are excellent at it. And some people don't really even try that. Some, like that is a cognitive entry point into it, or a cognitive emotional entry point into manipulation. Some people just get big and dominant and go into persecution and try and bowl their way in. Other people get really tiny and try and submit their way in and are nice enough and people pleasing enough that they think they'll get their needs met. And so I mean, I think there are the cognitive schemers that aim to do this stuff.
So cognitive manipulation, physical manipulation, emotional manipulation.
Yeah.
Are some of the things that we're grokking out of this conversation. Is there
right.
other forms of that you would throw into the conversation?
I mean, I think that's kind of the overview of the thing. Like, these are really the only operators that are there. I would say there you could include spiritual manipulation, but that would really be probably some combo of emotional and cognitive, or maybe all three of them if they're like in a cult and doing sleep deprivation or whatever.
Right. Power differential type of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So in this series, while we're doing this, we're going to talk about all of this. And we're going to try to grok out a little bit of pieces of this as we go along the line, how we, are in manipulative. One of the things that I have had a long time relationship with you around, Eric, and it's kind of a back and forth place where we play, is around aggression and microaggression, and how that is manipulative in that. And those aggressive pieces are how I push you back, how I get under your skin, how I move things from power, or perceived power of trying to make those things happen. And one of the things that I've really come to look at personally in those pieces is some of these things are so infinitely small that you lose track of where you're trying to refine and refine and refine, and it's still there because it's kind of in the DNA almost.
Right. And you're saying you, but you're meaning me in that description. I mean, you're talking about you and I, so I just want to track. I want to follow what you're saying.
Right.
That of, you lose track in it. It's like I'm hearing that I lose track and the assumption that I do as well. And
right.
So I'm just trying to track that in this example of real relationship happening right here.
Right. And it flows both ways in it. And it's really, this stuff when you do, when you talk about rat tangle, this is that. It's like, where does one begin and where does one end? Isn't it really? There isn't a beginning or an end to it. Okay. So that's the setup, guys. This has been our entry point. Listen to this, kind of get a bearing of where we're going. When we come back on our next podcast, we'll talk a little bit about fear and emotional manipulation, how blackmail, gaslighting, and covert aggression can happen. I don't know that we're going to spend it in all of that, but that's kind of the direction we're headed. And we'll pull out different pieces as we go and talk about what they are and how we can identify them, because when we're in manipulating or we're feeling like we're being manipulated, we need to have something we can orient to. And if we can feel or see into that so we can orient, then we can start to manage this stuff. We can start to manage ourselves, which I think is the primary piece that we want to always talk about, is take, personal responsibility and try to pull this stuff out. But when we are being gaslit or we're being emotionally blackmailed by somebody, we want to be able to orient to what that is so we can step out and just relax and go, I don't have to go there. So hang on. We'll be back next week and we'll talk about more of manipulation and identification and management. Take care, everybody. Thank you.